You can survive 3 minutes without air if you're lucky. It's invisible. You can't see it, smell it, or touch it. You definitely can't fight it. But the moment the air turns toxic, your survival clock starts. What would you do if your next breath could kill you? Welcome, my name's Todd. My grandkids call me Papa Todd. I was raised to be ready. From the time I was a kid, faith, family, and preparedness or preparation weren't hobbies. It was a way of life. Over the years, I've done a lot of things. I've trained dogs to attack on command. I've taught wilderness survival classes to a lot of people, and a little bit of urban survival tactics as well. I've tracked people through the woods. I've built shelters with my own hands and with just what's available, whatever the land gave me. My sons asked me to put this knowledge in one place, not for fame, but for the future, for my grandkids, and for anyone else that believes that self-reliance really matters. So if you're here to learn how to endure, adapt, and kind of rebuild, welcome to the Papa Todd channel, where preparation meets purpose. Air. How to breathe when the world turns toxic. The important part, I think, at first is to really focus on how threats appear to you, okay? So I'm going to break down, we talked a little bit in the previous video. If you haven't seen it, go back and check it out, where we're starting to prioritize these things and how the threat really appears to us and how big that threat can be. And so when I start categorizing these threats, I want to start at probably the most common, okay? These are the ones we're going to focus on the most and try to be prepared for the most. These would where your preps would start in your home. The first of which is industrial plants or chemical plants. We've just had a couple of those in the news just recently. Some big explosions, killed a lot of people, terrible things, and you know, the surrounding area is immediately affected by that, obviously. The next level up is more of a train derailment or a tanker where it can just pop up in the middle of nowhere. And so you may think to yourself, well, I know where these plants are and I'm not downwind of that and I feel like that's fine. Don't forget about the railways as well, or just a highway. A highway alone with a tanker of chlorine or ammonia can explode and make the immediate surrounding area very, very hard to manage. Most of the time, you're going to have some potentially mandatory evacuations for those cases, right? And we'll talk a little bit about those. When we talk about cranking it up to the next level, really a lot of places we've seen, even recently, and especially last year in Canada, wildfires. Wildfires are combined with volcanoes, and it's really about particulate matter in the air. So that's another one that we're going to focus on kind of in that sequence. And then lastly, which is probably the most uncommon, but a lot of people still think it's going to be very common. It has not really happened on a broad scale yet, and that would be biowarfare or terrorist type attacks. So those last two, the wildfires, volcanoes, terrorist attacks, biowarfare, really, you know, you need to be aware of your weather, your wind direction, the time of year that you're going to be potentially affected. I know my weather shifts, you know, summertime versus wintertime. So knowing the time of year you are and knowing the vicinity of those things, where they might be coming from toward you, is always something you just want to be aware of. So get to know that if you don't know that right now. The biggest emphasis I can make is the speed at which that you need to react. And so this could be something that's very close to you. It could be something that's very far from you. So having the idea of wind speed, how much time you really have, is super important. You may only have just a few minutes to prepare. And in that case, you're left with definitely prioritizing things and maybe cutting some corners, unfortunately. You may also have hours to get ready, and that's always very beneficial, obviously. But the more prepared you are ahead of time, you want to be as much as possible, because you might only have minutes. So it comes down to proximity. Know your surroundings, know where things might be coming from, know where your industrial plants, your chemical plants are, and knowing how that could affect you is always extremely important. So stay ahead of that. A lot of people think immediately, you know, we'll just bug out of here. We'll get out of here and get around this. And I'm not saying that's not an option, especially in the more common cases. But as you go up the scale and these things become more uncommon, they kind of, like if you imagine a forest fire that's a long ways away, you're not going to be able to circumvent that sometimes. It's just too far for you to go. Now, absolutely, if it's flames, you got to go. I get that. But at the same time, if it's just more smoke and particulate matter, it may be almost impossible to run from that. So consider those before you bug out. You know, you don't want to say, I can circumvent a train or I can circumvent, a chemical plant. Totally understand that scenario. And if that's the case, absolutely get out there and get around it. We'll talk about some immediate ways you can do that, even if it is, kind of the air is kind of compromised a little bit. But if it's local, you're aware of it, you're capable of getting around it pretty quickly, absolutely go ahead and do that. But the number one problem I have with bugging out is most likely there's going to be quite a few other people trying to do the same thing. And if you live in a subdivision with only one or two ways out, we're going to be talking about some significant congestion with traffic. And again, as you run up that scale of things being more uncommon and the more severe, the broader this event could be, you get out on the highway and you come to a complete standstill. Now you're out in the middle of nowhere in a car, and that may be your only protection. So think long and hard before you decide bugging out is the thing to do. If at all possible, you want to avoid that. When I look at it, 2 to 3 days, sometimes that road congestion can be severe. So unless you're starting super early to get away from this, you might want to consider staying in place. Now, one of these threats, like a biowarfare threat, you want to really consider this bug out situation too, whether or not you want to do that. Sometimes there's mandatory evacuations and they're just verbal. Sometimes they're going door to door, that kind of thing, potentially. That's in the plan anyway. I haven't seen a lot of that, but there is a little bit of that that's happened, going door to door. But not a biowarfare situation. This might be more broad mandatory situation where they're trying to force people out of their homes and into refugee camps. I warn you against refugee camps for a number of reasons. You can almost count on losing all of your belongings. So if you've prepped really well, you've got some great things that you're carrying with you, a refugee camp forces you to give up all your belongings, and that's a big loss to you potentially. Secondly, you're going to be rationed food. So if part of your belongings was extra food, they're going to confiscate that and they're going to spread that around, so to speak. So you've done your homework and you've done your due diligence to be prepared, but you walk into a refugee camp, they're going to confiscate that. So now you're going to be rationed with food, and you're also going to have a significant loss of sleep. Sleep is huge, especially in a stressful situation. You get into refugee camps, you can barely sleep at all. You've got too much activity, too many people, too many potential risks, and you're going to be on your guard like never before. It's going to wear at you, and your heightened awareness levels all the time are going to just give you a certain amount of fatigue. It's going to be a bad situation for you. And then ultimately, sometimes we see a lot of families get separated in these places, unfortunately, and whether that's intentional or not doesn't really matter. The fact is you're going to be having that threat. So avoid refugee camps or becoming a refugee at all costs. So let's talk about first steps. You need to look at your home, overview your home for each of these potential things. Floods are also an event that can typically be a part of these equations. And so you might have picked a room where flood is your choice. In other words, up and away from the basement. But yet with air, that's a little bit different scenario. You might consider a place in the basement if you have a basement and you have protection of concrete walls. All of a sudden that concrete wall becomes a real good barrier for you, and you might only have to look at covering one wall or the ceiling, and that's about it. Maybe two walls at the most, versus a situation where if you're upstairs, you're going to have to cover all the walls, the ceilings, the doors, and the openings. So let's talk about if it is upstairs and you don't have a basement situation, you might be looking at more of a bathroom or maybe a bigger walk-in closet. So those are really good options. You want to keep the space small enough that you can manage, but if you have more people, you're going to need a little bit more space. The average is about 10 square feet per person from an oxygen standpoint. So, keep that in mind when you consider the size or the space that you're trying to designate for this. If you do have a basement, then you want to pick a corner or a stoop, under stoop, like a front porch stoop typically is concrete. And then in the basement, now you have a concrete ceiling, concrete walls, and maybe just a door opening. Now that's ideal for an extreme situation, but you can also expand that beyond if the stoop area is fairly small. So consider those as being really good options. If you're at work, you may not have a lot of options. Hopefully you got a stairwell, or if nothing else, use a conference room where you can, get a group of people in there. So let's talk a little bit more about the criteria, because this is a speed thing. We're trying to get as much protection done as possible. So that's why an interior room with limited windows, limited doors, unlimited openings. Now, what I mean by that is like your furnace, your return vent, and your supply vent from the furnace. Those two things need to be sealed off as well. So trying to keep those rooms to smaller size and limited number of openings is really ideal. Additionally, you want to look for the room that might have a hardwood floor or hard floors of some sort, mainly because carpet can tend to breathe and allow some of that to come through under the door. It also collects potential chemicals and things like that if it is in the air. And so having the ability to have a hard floor is ideal. So obviously the goal here is to limit the outside air. So one of the first steps you're going to do is turn off your furnace. You want to stop the flow of air moving around your house as quickly as possible. Now, you may have lost power, but we don't want to count on that. We want to turn that off regardless, if at all possible. Sometimes it kicks on after we're in our safe place too. So that's why we go ahead and cover up all those vents. I like to cover up a vent by removing the two screws that typically hold it in place. Put a piece of plastic over that overlaps it a little bit by 2-3 inches at least on each side, and then screw that back in there. So that basically seals that off for you and keeps it nice and tight. You can go ahead and duct tape the perimeter of that if you want to, just to kind of double down and make sure it's sealed off really, really good. So in addition to turning off your furnace, you want to go ahead and turn off any fans that might be in your house that might be pushing air and moving air. This could also be like a dehumidifier, things like that might be down in the basement with you. Again, you don't want to be pushing air around and moving things. You want it to be as stable as possible. If you do have a fireplace, masonry fireplace that could be open, obviously you want to close that damper, but you also want to put plastic across that or find some way to seal that off as well as you possibly can. If you're going to be a long ways away from the fireplace, I understand that may seem like you don't need to do it, but in some ways that moves a lot more air through the house than you think. So that's a lot to think about. There's a lot to try to put together, and I know it kind of, under a stressful situation, you got to be prepared. So when we talk about sealing off the room, we're really talking about putting plastic up in all these locations. And so we need a 4 to 6 mil plastic if at all possible. And we need to line these doorways and have enough duct tape to go around those doorways and seal that off. I like the wider duct tape if you've got it, if you've got access to it, that's a good one. A lot of people think blue tape is good enough, but here's the problem with blue tape. It's designed with a smaller amount of adhesive. It's meant to remove off of paint so that you basically don't pull the paint off like you would with duct tape, most likely. So those who want to use that, I would caution you to, it's going to take a lot more work and it's going to take a lot longer. If you've got the time to do it, that's great. Go ahead and put your blue tape down around the doorways, and then you can use the plastic and then put the duct tape on top of the blue tape. But now what you've got is a lot of weight. You got the plastic as weight, and you've got the duct tape as weight, and you're putting that on the blue tape. So you got to watch that blue tape because of the lack of adhesive. It will want to come off the wall. So either get over the paint, or hopefully it's in an area where it really won't matter. It shouldn't matter at the time, but you do need to kind of prepare so you can at least cut the poly, the plastic, and have it ready to go. Have it marked so that you know exactly which piece goes where. you need at least 3 rolls of duct tape, because hopefully you've got 2 people actively working and putting up this duct tape to make it as quick and as efficient as possible. And you need a 3rd roll as just a backup, just in case, for other things you might be able to use it for. So now once you kind of have this whole plan laid out, you got everything put together, I want you to put that plastic in the room that you intend to use it, along with kind of I'd call it a safe room kit, so to speak. So once everyone is in the safe room, close the door and seal it off by pushing a cloth or plastic bags under the door to stop any flow underneath there. If you don't have anything like that, take a trash bag and put a shirt or some sort of clothing in it, roll it up and shove it under the door. We don't want something that's breathable like only clothes. We want to go ahead and surround that with plastic so we don't have anything filtering through. And then we want to take duct tape like we talked about before and go all the way around all those openings, making sure we got plenty of seal all the way around. If you have to cut a seam or there's a seam anywhere, make sure you overlap that 3 to 5 inches. We don't want the ability for any of those seams to just come loose at some point in time. And you want to keep an eye on these. Make sure they're pressed down throughout the whole time frame. If you need to add additional duct tape to any areas, just be constantly inspecting those to ensure that you don't have any leaks. One point of caution that I'm going to raise here has to do with a couple other things that we'll talk about in more detail. But candles are a no-no. In this situation, there's a couple reasons. The first of which is a candle is one more person using up what available oxygen you have. So we're only going to be using flashlights. So have the extra batteries in the room. Make sure you've got all that available. Do not use candles. You can still have them there, but seal them up. Make sure nobody uses them, because it's going to eat up oxygen. Go ahead and have some scissors in the room in case you need to cut some things. Super handy scissors, maybe some extra gloves for if you need to do any additional work. You don't want to hurt your hands. You know, have a pair of gloves, maybe 2 in the room there with it in this kit. We talked a little bit about the flashlights. Now you could have one that kind of is more like a lantern, so it gives the room quite a bit of light. But then you'll need some additional lighting. I always like the headlamps. Headlamps are great, kind of focuses when you need to. Headlamps are really good if others might be sleeping and you just want to have a general light in the direction you need to be looking. So that's a good one as well. The next thing is a 5-gallon bucket toilet kit. If you ever seen how to make one of those, they're pretty easy, pretty simple. You get kind of like a pool noodle, and you put it on top of a 5-gallon bucket. You have plastic bags on the inside. Obviously, you're going to need toilet paper with that, maybe some wipes, maybe some hand sanitizer. The next thing in your kit, you might want to think about having enough space for some pillows and blankets. If you're going to be there a while, being comfortable can make a world of difference. So anything like that, if you've got the space for it, go ahead and keep a blanket and some pillows, things like that, just to keep a little extra warmth. Now, some say, you know, having some entertainment of some sort, maybe a board game or some cards, things like that, some sort of game to pass the time, especially with kids, to kind of get them to thinking about other things and keep their mind off of it and to de-stress a little bit. That's always good to have in there. Now, the obvious, food and water. Depending on your belief on what might be happening, obviously the more food and water you have, the better. So you can over prep a little bit, or maybe you can have a bag that's ready to go. If this is a closet, you may not want to have a bunch of stuff cluttered up in there, right? So you may have a couple other bags that you can quickly and easily grab and take into that safe room with you. So keep that in mind when it comes to food. Sometimes we have, you know, containers that we've saved that we can put water in and store that more long term. That'd be a great idea, and then keeping that in something you can transport if it's not in the vicinity of the room that you're going to be using. Now, comms or radio, or if your phone still works, then obviously having a charger in that area to be able to listen to your phone and watch news. If you got some weather apps, different types of news apps, things to keep an eye on what's going on. Some form of communication is great. Now, if power's out or phones are down, things like that, then you might want to look at getting in one of the crank radios. Crank radios don't require batteries. You just crank it and it gives it some energy, and you can start checking some things out and seeing, you know, what the status is. Communication can sometimes be a huge factor and saving people's lives. So definitely want to look into something like that. Now, if you have more room, and there's some other things that I think that would be great to add, some of these don't take up any space at all, so they should be definitely on this list for you. The first of which is hand warmers. Hand warmers, you know, simple little box like this, you can get like 30 or 40 of them in there, and they go a long way, especially if, you know, you're in a basement situation and you're feeling like it's real chilly and we're just not able to stay cold or stay warm. You know, breaking a few of those out, hand them to the kids, be able to kind of warm up a little bit is always good. Plus, if you have to venture out and you may not, you know, have a vehicle and you may have to venture through rain, then those come in super handy, which leads us to our next one, is rain jackets, rain suits, ponchos, things like that. They don't take up a ton of space. A poncho can go over the outside of clothes. Those are super easy to keep, as well as some of those blankets, heat warming blankets. They're just foil type. They're rolled up. They're nice and tight. Keep a couple of those. Those will add additional heat and keep body heat in extreme situations. So that's definitely a couple of things that I would have in there that don't take up any space at all. The next one is a fire blanket. Fire blankets, you know, fold up to about like this, and they're really good at being able to put out a fire, whether that's in an area or on yourself. They're also nice to be able to put over you should you need to run through a fire wall or some sort of, you know, thin fire. Don't be running into a fire thinking you're going to be protected, but minimal protection, but still something that's super valuable. Another item I would look at putting in your kit is a protective coverall. This is more of a dust protective coverall. It has a hood that comes up over your, it kind of full suit, full body suit except for your hands. It would encompass your feet as well. And this is a great item to have in case you do have some particulates that are there and somebody might need to venture outside of that room. So having those on would be having those in your kit would be a really great idea. And the last thing you would have in there is 72-hour packs. So backpacks that are designed and already put together, ready in case you need about 3 days worth of bug out situation or 3 days worth of food. So these can be single packs for 2 people. You can have some additional items that if you have kids, things like that, then that'll work too. I actually have 2 packs. I have a pack for the back and a pack for the front, and each of those has different responsibilities and different things that I keep in them. So keep those things in mind if you do need to bug out of there or be on the go and you want to have the autonomy to evaluate your own situation and be able to control the next 3 days. Put those items in there. There's a number of great 72-hour kits with, you know, some basic things, but they need to be tweaked. Everything needs to fit you, your surroundings, your area, and the time of year that you might be having to make that move. All right, the next section we need to talk about is breathing apparatuses. Now, there's a broad range. There's a ton of things out there, so I don't want to get bogged down with all of them. There's a bunch of good ones. You can go to the Army surplus store. You can come up with all kinds of bioweapon type of apparatus and things like that, and you can absolutely do that. And I don't always like to trust things that have been used already, so if I were you, I'd stick to something that's new. And let's talk about some of the things that are out there that you should be looking for. I'm going to start with the most basic and we'll work up to some of the more advanced. Obviously the N95 masks we are all very familiar with now. There's also a P100 mask that's out there as well. These are super affordable. They come in boxes. You can get many of them for cheap. You know, I think you can get 50 of them in there for $5 or something along that if you look around. 3M, lots of people make lots of different kinds. Don't get crazy and splurge on all kinds of crazy stuff, but just have some of those lower grade ones available for the what if. Keep in mind those N95 masks are for dust particles. It filters those particles. It's not a chemical resistant mask. So we probably need a second layer and second level ready for that potential problem in our kit. So that is a combination gas vapor respirator. So these are typically a dual cartridge. It's got an organic vapor and an acid gas combination that it actually protects against. And obviously the particulates as well. Now these are going to be a little bit more expensive. You might be looking somewhere between $40 and $60 for something like that. The next step up would be something like a full face respirator. This is going to give you the advantage of protecting your eyes as well. So that's always a good thing, especially if, chlorine or ammonia might be the chemical that you're dealing with. A face respirator is going to be a must because your eyes are going to be affected. These series of masks tend to be quite pricey. They might run about $150 for each of those. You want to be sure and you get the appropriate size for whoever might be wearing this. The range of those can be pretty significant for 4 to 12-year-olds. Obviously, you want to try to do a fitting for those to make sure they fit perfectly. Now, there are some powered air purifier respirators out there, PAPRs. This is battery powered and it powers through cartridges. This is really going to be useful for longer durations, especially if you're outside of a protected area and you're on the move trying to make sure you can get away from that. These can be substantially expensive. These are going to be somewhere between a $500 and $800 range depending on the brand that you pick. But they can be irreplaceable if you have to be on the move and you're in an area where your eyes can be affected. Now, the next type is more of an emergency hood. So these hoods are kind of a pullover, cinch up situation. They're fairly compact, so they don't take up a ton of space, but they really only last for about 15 minutes to an hour, somewhere in that range, depending on how much you might be needing to filter out, obviously. I would look at these as kind of your quick escape situation where, you have a short distance to go, but you need to get through something. And so, giving yourself 15, 30 minutes, that's ideal. Anything beyond an hour, it's really not going to be something you want to use. There's quite a few manufacturers of these to choose from. They're going to range anywhere from $150 to $300 based on the model. Let's talk children, especially babies and toddlers. We, through the pandemic, realized that toddlers do not like masks. And so you really need the hood type for them to be able to feel fairly comfortable. And obviously you need to play with that prior to. We don't want this being a situation where they're so scared of it that they're just not going to wear it. So play that game where you put yours on first, they get to try, feel the level of discomfort they might have with it, try to make it fun and make it a game. We don't want to have to experience them not be willing to do this and it's being a forced situation. It's very stressful for everyone. So make sure you work on this well ahead of time and play with that. These hoods are going to basically provide airflow to your entire head for the child. So those are the kind of the apparatuses that I think are the least intrusive. They feel like it's, not creating it, it's not wearing on their face or creating some sort of feeling of they're being closed off too much. Children 4 to 12, there's quite a few out there. You'll be able to find that there's plenty of respirator type units out there for all ages and sizes. Getting those smaller sizes and trying them is really what it's about. The escape hoods as well, they've got a number of escape hoods that would work for 4 to 12-year-olds as well. It's just, again, fit testing is essential. So take the time ahead of time, try them on and make sure they fit everybody. Now let's talk about the entire family. How could we get the entire family in a situation where we have complete protection? It may not be that you have a really good situation from a home standpoint, maybe an apartment situation where it's like tiny closets, tiny bathrooms, big family, or not enough, and you feel like we need to go to the next level. Well, there's a number of products out there that kind of it's a family-sized clean air room. It's kind of like a complete protection. It's like a cube or a bubble, and it's considerably large, and you can basically set it up and you could start pushing air even if you needed to into these. So that's kind of a unique one. It can be a little pricey to get those done, and there's a little bit of DIY that needs to happen for you to be able to have that as well. These were kind of originated in Israel by the Israeli Homefront Command. And there's a number of upgrades that you can put in these, like HEPA filters and heat, things like that. So it's a pretty unique product that could go a long ways based on your situation where it is. So installing some of these HEPA filters in your room where you might be, some of these are portable units. Some of them are a little bit more permanent, but looking into the HEPA filter in those rooms would be a real smart thing to do. Wildfires, things like that, you might be hunkered down for, 2 days at a time. You definitely want those HEPA filters helping you out, and you might also want to consider getting some oxygen bottles. Again, that's why we don't have any candles in the room at all. We don't light any fires in that room. We got compressed oxygen tanks potentially creating a problem. If you get a leak or accidentally don't make a connection properly, you could have some serious issues there. So keep that in mind. There are some NBC CBRN cartridges out there that are kind of a step up above what typically you would receive in some sort of mask. So some of these are just activated carbon plus particulate. So we're stepping it up a notch when it comes to some of those compatible earlier respirators that we talked about. If you can have the most advanced filter, why wouldn't you? Or at least have that as a backup, right? So, and I always tell people, don't ever just get one backup to your filter cartridge. You want to have at least 2 backups, if not 3. I mean, if you have enough, just buy as many as you think you need, because ultimately sometimes we might be locked down and unable to move for 4 or 5 days. In some cases, we've seen some fires and some volcanic issues that typically don't clear up for at least 3 days. So that can be a significant time frame if you're too close to those fires. But ultimately, the bioweapon and all those types of things, a lot of fear involved in that kind of stuff. And just, you got to remember, those are super uncommon. And most likely, we're going to have locations where that's a dense population of people. If you feel like you're in an area like that, then obviously those might be things you want to focus on a little bit more. That means your safe room kit needs to be amped up a little bit and prepared a little bit more than the average person. So keep all these things in mind. I hope some of this helps you kind of sort your way and keep you from getting too emotional, keep getting too, fearful of these things. Getting them out, I wouldn't say playing with them, but getting familiar with them, getting your room, your safe room prepared in some sort of way is an act that brings comfort, a little bit of comfort to you, so that you feel like you're not going to be frozen in fear, trying to remember what the steps are, what the next thing you need to do is. So if you like this video, somebody who really might be interested in this, please share this. And if you're not subscribed, please hit subscribe. It's free. And like it as well. And I hope to see you in the next one, where we're probably going to be talking finally about a little bit of shelter. We'll see you soon. Thanks.